Let us discuss the next question. This is from 2021. We adopted the parliamentary democracy based on the British model. But how does our model differ from that model? The question is clearly saying we adopted the parliamentary democracy based on the British model, that is the Westminster model. But how does the Indian democracy differ from British democracy? Statement 1. As regards the legislation, the British Parliament is supreme or sovereign, but in India, the power of the Parliament to legislate is limited. Statement 2. In India, matters related to the constitutionality of the amendment of an Act of Parliament are referred to the Constitution bench by the Supreme Court. Select the correct answers using the code given below. Now, what is a parliamentary democracy? In the parliamentary democracy, how does it work? The executive comes out of the legislature, and ultimately the executive, that is the council of ministers headed by the prime ministers, will be responsible to the Lok Sabha. So this is how it works. Statement 1 is saying, as regards the legislation, the British Parliament is supreme or sovereign, but in India, the power of the Parliament to legislate is limited. This is correct. In Britain, the Parliament is supreme when it comes to legislating anything, but the powers in the Indian Constitution, the powers of the Parliament are limited by the Constitution. That is why the Indian government, the Indian Constitution limits the powers on the Parliament. So it is also known as the limited government because the Constitution puts certain restrictions on the powers of the Parliament. Statement 2 says, in India, the matters related to the amendments of the Constitution are referred to the Constitution bench by the Supreme Court. Yes, using the power of the judicial review, when a question about the amendments about the Constitution comes in, the Supreme Court do refer it to a constitutional bench who has the powers to decide on the validity of those acts. So both the statements are correct. That is, statement 1 and 2 are correct. Now let us look at the in-depth explanation. Statement 1 talked about the parliamentary system. So in the Indian parliamentary system, based on the constitutional supremacy, unlike the British Parliament, which is based on the parliamentary supremacy, the British, they follow the parliamentary supremacy where the parliament has the ultimate supreme power. But in India, the powers of the parliament are restrained or controlled by the constitution, because for us, the constitution is the supreme document. So the power to legislate is limited to an extent. So that is why the statement was correct. And statement number 2 talked about the Supreme Court and referring them to the Constitution bench. Yes, the Parliament has the power to make the laws, but this power is not absolute. We just saw it here. The powers are limited. Now, whatever are the acts of the Parliament, they are open to judicial review. This is based on the principle of checks and balances. The court has the power to review a particular act and see if it is valid or not as per the provisions of the Constitution. Now we also need to look at the difference between the Indian model and the British model. In India, we follow the republican system. Republic is where the head of the president is elected. So our head of the state, the head of the state is elected. So our head of the state, the president, is elected. But the British follow the monarchical system where their head of the state is the monarch. It can either be the king or the queen. We follow this constitutional supremacy model where the constitution is the supreme document and the powers of the parliament are limited. The British follow the parliamentary sovereignty where the powers of the parliament are supreme or sovereign. In India, again, the PM can be a member of any of the houses. The PM can come from Lok Sabha or the PM can be somebody from Rajya Sabha, just like how Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was. But in British model, the PM has to be a member of the lower house. Also in the Indian model, we don't have a system of legal responsibility and the ministers are not required to countersign the official acts, but it is the opposite in the British model. We don't follow the idea of shadow cabinets, but the British model follows the idea of shadow cabinet. So these are the differences between the Indian model and the British model. Coming back to the question, the answer is C, both 1 and